Hey drivers, welcome to the Universitatel Sim Racing channel, or welcome back if you're already subscribed or following our videos. Today we're diving once more into the world of Le Mans Ultimate. What we want to show you today is how tire drop-off, or different driving styles in general, can lead to faster tire degradation, even over very short stints. The stints we're going to break down, and the data I'll be showing you towards the end of the video, come from two very short sessions. One is 6 laps long, the other 7. The key difference between the two driving styles lies in how the steering wheel is used, how load is generated on the tire, and how much energy is pushed into it, sometimes even by repeatedly using the TC override without necessarily overdoing it. That said, let's jump straight into the analysis. We're going to take a close look at the two stints. The biggest difference, not just in terms of driving but also execution, is that right from the outlap, there's an intense focus on working the front end. During the stint, we're also going to use the TC override to deal with the excess understeer that tends to build up. You'll notice in several parts of the track, especially during the first stint, that tire degradation happens really fast. That's because we're not only loading a lot of energy into the tire by cranking in a lot of steering angle to carry more speed, but we're also causing temperatures to spike quickly. This in turn speeds up the sliding process of the tire. And it's exactly this kind of driving style that leads to premature degradation. If you were to keep driving like this over a long stint, it would cause massive balance issues because you'd end up with a very worn front end, sky-high pressures and temperatures, while the rear would still be relatively fresh because it's not being stressed as much during rotation. That means you'd be generating a lot less energy and temperature in the rear tires, so their pressure wouldn't build up nearly as much. The result? Completely unbalanced tire wear. Front tires shredded, rear tires barely touched. To try and wear the rears a bit more, we can use the TC override, but if you're not careful, it can cause oversteer or make the car's rotation response too slow, making things really tricky to handle. That's why TC override needs to be used with a lot of caution. You can definitely use it aggressively in qualifying, where you're trying to squeeze out every bit of performance, and you can push the steering angle a bit further to get the most out of the tires. But especially in slow corners, even though the TC override can help you rotate quicker or avoid getting bogged down on corner exit, you have to be very careful with how and when you apply it. If you're driving smoothly but hit the TC override too early or too hard, you'll cause major problems for the tires. During the stint, as you'll see, especially in the final laps, the front tires start to suffer badly. That's because right from the first few laps, we've pushed them into a kind of thermal shock by going hard too early, overheating them, and sending pressures way too high. Always remember, both in LMU and in rFactor 2, since they share the same physics engine and a lot of core features, running high pressures is a huge disadvantage. Tires with high pressures have a lot less grip compared to when they're running lower pressures. That's why in-game, you usually aim for the lowest possible pressures to maximize performance. As for temperatures, you always want to stay around the 100 degrees Celsius mark, maybe just under, maybe just over, but you should never be touching numbers like 105, 106, or even worse, 110 degrees Celsius. Even hitting 101, 102 degrees Celsius, or 103 degrees Celsius can start triggering internal overheating, which leads to thermal degradation. And just so you know, this behavior has been made even more noticeable since the February patch. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't be reactive or, even in quotes, a bit aggressive in our driving style. Absolutely, yes, but we need to balance that aggressiveness, that reactivity, without relying solely on one tool or one input, in this case, steering angle, to make it happen. Instead, you need to work the brake, the throttle, and the steering together to create rotation that's aggressive enough to push a lot of energy into the tires, but still balanced enough to avoid creating a big mismatch in wear between the front and rear axles. With that in mind, we're going to check out some clips from the second stint where the warm-up phase was a bit calmer. Not slow, calm in the sense that we actually warm up both axles more evenly using less steering input. In neither stint did we do any weaving, by the way. We wanted to simulate a real race start, with no tricks to artificially heat up the tires. In the second stint, we also completed one extra lap, and you'll see the results in the telemetry. The first stint, the one where we overdid it with the steering and the TC override, was 6 laps long. The second stint stretched to 7. From the very first few corners, you'll notice that the turn-in is way smoother. We're not forcing the tire as much. Even from the sound, you can tell the tires are under less stress. In Le Mans Ultimate, it's actually pretty easy to pick up just from the audio feedback when the tires are working properly or when they're struggling. When you hear that loud, screechy noise, it's a sign the tire is falling out of its optimal window. But when the sound is more muted, deeper, that's when you're really using the full potential of the tire and riding right on the limit. In the second stint, you'll also see more detailed trail braking and a much more active use of the steering wheel, but with way smaller peaks in steering angle. We're not using the steering as the main tool to rotate the car anymore. We're using it to give direction. These might sound similar, but they're actually two completely different things. We're leaning much more on the pedals to help rotate the car and doing it in a way that keeps everything balanced. And again, this is crucial if you want to bring both axles, front and rear, up to temperature and pressure together, avoiding big spikes up front. That way you get better grip not just on the first lap, when the tires are fresh and at their best, but you also delay that typical performance drop-off of 7, 8 tenths, or even a full second. Of course, in this example, the time differences were small. We're talking tenths or even thousandths, but everything adds up when you're trying to keep your tire window open for as long as possible. And remember, this analysis is based on a very short sample. Imagine applying the same principles over a 12, 15, 20, or even 30 lap stint. The results would be dramatically different. In the first style, you might end up with a 20 to 30% gap in wear between the front and rear tires, while with the second approach, you'd have a much more even balance. What you're seeing in the second stint is still aggressive and reactive driving. We're not holding back there, but we're making sure to involve all 4 tires properly, keeping wear rates much more balanced. For example, if your front tires are down to 82% and your rears are sitting pretty at 92, 93, or 94%, then you've got a serious balance problem. Not just from a setup standpoint, but from a driving style perspective. It means you've either put in too much steering angle or overworked the front axle way too much. Now let's jump into some telemetry data for a second. Looking at the numbers, you'll clearly see that the biggest difference between the two stints lies in how the tires are brought up to temperature and pressure. Just like you saw from the on-track footage, there's a big gap in wear between the fronts and rears, mainly because in the first stint, the steering wheel was used very aggressively to rotate the car, pumping a lot of energy into the tires during turn-in. Of course, both things, overusing the steering angle and forcing the car aggressively into the corners, generate way too much energy into the tires, causing a big spike in temperature and, as a result, in pressure. Specifically, the excessive steering angle combined with how quickly we try to turn the car into the corner causes a lot of sliding, which you can easily pick up not just from telemetry, but also from the sound feedback we talked about earlier. When you can clearly hear the difference between a tire that's working well and one that's starting to lose grip and slide, kicking off the overheating process. That being said, now we want you to compare the warm-up laps from both stints, where you can clearly see how using too much TC override and applying too much steering input too early not only heats up the tires too quickly, but also leads to a huge rise in pressures. We're on a simulator where the way the tire model is built, the lower the pressure, the more efficient the tire is at generating grip. Because of that, even a warm-up that feels fast, which to be fair it actually is, needs to be handled with a lot of care. If you're not careful about how you bring the tires up to pressure, you'll notice that at the start of the lap, things might seem relatively normal, even if you see some spikes. But by the final sector and the end of the lap, the situation completely changes. We start the lap with crazy high tire pressures, talking about 3 kilopascals, 3.2, even 3.28, which on the front tires is a lot, especially if you're hunting for the limit. Now imagine a race scenario. If you want your performance curve to stay consistent over the whole distance, you absolutely have to avoid this kind of situation. As you'll see, we're starting the lap with tires that are about 10 degrees Celsius hotter, especially up front. At the rear, temperatures vary, hotter in some parts, cooler in others, but we'll show you how, by the final laps of the stint, this imbalance just keeps getting worse. Another thing to point out, in the second stint, where we drove more balanced and allowed the rear to rotate naturally, we actually managed to complete an extra lap. And if you look closely at the tire data, I'll even change colors on the telemetry to make it easier to spot, you'll see the wear is way more even. Despite doing an extra lap, the percentage of tire left is much more consistent, with the rear tires holding on to a slightly higher percentage. That's because we induced less aggressive rotation and balanced the wear between front and rear much better. In the first stint, on the other hand, there was a huge gap between front and rear wear. You can also see it in the average temperatures and pressures we recorded. We grabbed the data from the final laps, but it was a trend that was developing throughout the entire stint. Once you start warm up with a style that throws a lot of energy into the front tires and lean hard on the TC override to fix understeer, you inevitably create spikes in temperature and pressure, especially on the front axle. These spikes cause a massive drop-off in performance and seriously speed up the tire degradation process. The drop-off will still be in the range of 7 or 8 tenths, maybe a full second, but it'll happen much sooner and get worse faster. So basically, you're just accelerating the degradation, ending up with a tire that's already way less efficient from the very first lap. A driving style like that isn't just less efficient for the tires, it makes the whole car behave worse on track. That's the full picture. Let us know what you think about this more technical content, especially about managing tire drop-off even in shorter races. As you've seen, even over stints as short as 6 or 7 laps, you can already start to stress the tires enough to hurt their performance. Managing tire pressure properly can make a huge difference. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check us out at unisimracing.com. See you soon, top drivers.